Okay, ladies and gentlemen, good evening, Democrats.
Good evening, Democrats.
Good evening, Democrats.
Okay, how about on Zoom? Let's come on. Let's see your faces. We've got you up on the screen here so we can all see you. Let's see your screens. Let's unmute. Let's try it one more time. Good evening, Democrats.
Good evening,
Democrats.
Okay, well, that'll work. It's fine. So the good news is, folks, the resistance is working. Our public pressure is mounting. Elon Musk is leaving his government role. The courts are pushing back against executive overreach. We continue to overperform in special elections, and the tide is turning. The strategies that Ted Lieu shared with us last month, right here on the stage, are bearing fruit. But we have to keep up the pressure. So everybody mark your calendars. June 14th is No King's Day. This country, as I've said here before, was founded on the fact that we don't have kings. We don't have a monarchy. We have elected officials who are responsible to the people, we the people who are sovereign. So Trump is having a big birthday party with military troops marching up and down the mall. We're going to have the biggest protest we've ever had. It's going to be a massive day of protest nationwide, organized by Indivisible. We're going to show up. We're going to speak out. We're going to shut this whole thing down. So let's all make sure we're out there in the streets. We have a lot going on here at the club. We're knee deep with the airport committee right now. We've been working on studying the Santa Monica airport and what's going to happen when we close it. We have had 2 committee meetings about this since our last membership meeting. And next week on Zoom, we're going to have a special membership meeting to look at the 3 scenarios proposed by Sasaki. It'll be presented by Amber Rashane from city staff. We'll have Q&A. And then on June 25th, we'll have our full presentation from our airport committee here in the membership meeting, followed by a discussion of how to proceed as a club with our recommendation to council. Now, what we're focused on right now on this process is what gets included in the EIR, the Environmental Impact Report. There's lots of options that could be, the future of the airport. We want to make sure that one of those options is in the EIR that we like so that we can see the full impact, because it's going to be very hard to push for something that's not included in that EIR. So there's, the committee's been talking about this, but we have basically like one main item and then 3 alternatives that can be included in there. So we want to make sure that whatever this club and this committee decides is the best path forward, that's one of the things that's included in that EIR. Also on June 25th, our next membership meeting, we're going to be joined by Brittany McKinley, who's the president of the LA Human Relations Commission, who's running for state senate to succeed Ben Allen. So that Senate race is shaping up to be one of the most competitive in our region. We're going to have a full candidates debate later this summer, right here on this stage, with an endorsement vote set for our September meeting. Stay tuned for more information about that. So very hot Senate race. We have lots of other important statewide races as well this election cycle, not the least of which is the governor's race, which is why we have been joined tonight by not 1, but 2 candidates running for governor this evening. So in a little while, we will be joined by former controller Betty Yee. But first, I want to introduce our first guest, who served on the West Contra School Board and Richmond City Council before serving in the Assembly for 4 years and as our state superintendent of public instruction for 8 years. He's now running for governor of California. Please welcome Superintendent Tony Thurmond. Hey, good to see you. Yes, we got
here.
Yeah, right this way.
Okay.
You can, the microphone's wireless, so you can take it. You can stand, you can sit, make yourself at home.
Good evening, Democrats.
Good evening. Oh, yeah, maybe.
How's that?
Oh, yeah.
Good evening, everyone. Good evening, everyone in the room. Good evening to everyone who's joined by Zoom. I'm Tony Thurmond. I'm honored to serve as your state superintendent of public instruction, serving our 10,000 schools and our nearly 6 million students in the state. I'm the guy who gets blamed for everything that goes wrong in education. And I can't even get down one aisle in the grocery store without someone stopping me to talk about education and some concern. And we have 1,000 school districts. And so typically what happens is I take those complaints and I just contact the superintendent or the board members of those districts, and we work together to solve those problems. And so, but it is an honor to serve as your superintendent. I'm in my final term, and I've served you for almost 18 years as an elected official. And I still believe in the state. And there are many things that I think that we can do in education, certainly a part of that, but there are many things that we have to do in this state. The first thing I want to tell you is that we're not going to let the U.S. Department of Education close, not on our watch. I never thought in my lifetime I would hear any person, let alone someone who's serving in public office, talk about closing the Department of Education. Education is the backbone of our democracy. It is the cornerstone of what we hold dear and how people come to live the American dream. People like me. I'm the son and grandson of immigrants from, my mother was born in Panama and her mother was born in San Andres, Colombia. They came here trying to make a better life. My grandparents cleaned bathrooms for a living, and they believed in education. And without education, I wouldn't be standing before you. When I was 6 years old, I lost my only parent to cancer, my mom. And my dad, who was a Vietnam vet, never came home from the war. I found my father on the internet as a 39-year-old man and had my first conversation with him. And so after my mom passed away, I went to live with my cousin, who lives in Philadelphia and who raised me as her son, with education being the center of everything that we do. I grew up in a household where we didn't have food most of the time. I grew up on the free lunch program, on food stamps and government cheese. And these are programs that help my family to overcome poverty. We ate so many government cheese sandwiches, the slice of cheese on the sandwich was about this thick. But these are programs through the USDA that help my family to overcome poverty. And I'm fighting today to make sure that California students have the same thing. That's why I'm proud to have created what we call universal meals in our state, so that every student in our school gets 2 free meals a day, regardless of their background. And so if you hear nothing else about my message tonight, I ask you to reach out to our senators here, but also other senators in the country, to let them know to vote against closing the U.S. Department of Education. As you all know, the president can't close the Department of Education through executive order. And so it's important that senators, if every Democratic senator votes no about closing the Department of Education, there's no way that the votes will be there to close the Department of Education. The loss of the Department of Education for us means about $8 billion in funding, especially in special education funding. And so I ask you to reach out to all senators to remind them to vote no on closing the U.S. Department of Education. While all these things are going on, I've signed on to about 7 or 8 lawsuits to block President Trump's ability to take away our funding. And the courts have held and passed an injunction on all of the lawsuits that I've signed on to preserve our funding, to be able to talk about diversity, and to protect our LGBTQ plus students in the state of California. It is the law, and it is their right to be protected. We protect transgender athletes. We protect all of our students. We don't do book banning here, and I've been fighting. Some of you may have seen me on TV. I went to Chino Unified on the night that they were going to vote on their forced outing program, where they out LGBTQ plus students and put them in harm's way. And the board president had 7 or 8 security guards and police officers throw me out in the presence of Proud Boys. And so what did I do? I went back to Sacramento and worked on legislation called AB 1855 that we passed to say in our state, we don't ban books, and we give our students the right to be protected from forced outing policies that put them in harm's way. And so, we're leading on these issues. I've introduced legislation to block President Trump's attack on our immigrant families. It's called SB 48, and it says that ICE immigration has no place on our school campuses. Stay out of our schools, and let's not disrupt our immigrant families, not to mention that when you have ICE enforcement, it suppresses school attendance, and that suppresses the revenue that our schools count on to get their average daily attendance. And so we're busy pushing back on the Trump administration through the lens of education, through the lens of protecting LGBTQ plus students and protecting our immigrant families. As you think about the issues of the state, I made the decision to run for governor because we've got to address our homelessness. We've got to address our housing crisis. We have to make sure that there's health care and good jobs for Californians. We're losing people and we're losing businesses who are our employers, and we have to make sure that we create opportunities for Californians. And so I'm working on legislation to help us close the gap. We have 240,000 homeless students in our state. Right now, 10,000 of them are unaccompanied. 40% of our unhoused are older Californians. And so I'm working on programs to help build more affordable housing. Last year, I was able to get a bond program passed of $10 billion to build and modernize our schools. Right now, we're working on a $10 billion bond to build affordable housing for elderly Californians, for working class Californians. And I'm working on a strategy with our schools. Our schools have more than 75,000 acres of surplus land. If we built just a half a dozen units on that surplus land, which is in every county in our state, we can get to 2.3 million units built by the year 2030. And so I'm leading this effort to help our schools build the housing for teachers and classified staff and nurses and folks who can't afford to live where they work. And so we're busy addressing these issues in our state. And I love the state, and I know what it can be because of what it's meant for me. But we have to have the right policies and the right leaders at the right time moving forward to address the many challenges that we face. I'm happy to take your questions, but first I want to acknowledge Betty Yee, who you're going to hear from in a few minutes, who was gracious enough to give me the opportunity to greet you all as I have to travel back to Sacramento. And so what I agreed to do is keep my remarks short, take your questions, and then cede my time to my distinguished colleague, Betty Yee. And so thank you for being here tonight. Thank you for being interested in our democracy, for being part of the resistance, and letting people know that we will not stand for education to be abolished in the great state of California and in the United States. Thank you. Perhaps you have some questions for me?
Yeah, I do. So we took the questions in advance from our members, and they submitted it, and I put them together here for you. The first one is sort of big picture. We appreciate hearing about your experience and how you were able to do so much work from your position as superintendent. What would be your priorities as a governor, and what would distinguish you from the rest of the field in why you should be governor?
You know, as I mentioned in my opening, I think that we have to address the housing crisis and we have to address the issues of homelessness. And California has been behind in the production of units for many years. In Los Angeles County, it can take 6 years to permit any unit or development. And so we have to streamline those processes because without units, it also drives up the cost. And so what you have are Californians who can't afford to rent and who cannot afford to buy. As I mentioned, I'm working on an initiative that will allow us to build 2 million units by the year 2030. Every county in our state has schools that have surplus property that can be used to build affordable housing. First thing we need to do is pay teachers and classified staff better. We've got to pay our educators better and live up to our promise when we say that children are our future, but we have a revenue crisis in our state. And I believe that part of why Donald Trump is trying to close the U.S. Department of Education is to take that money and then to give it to the billionaires in a tax credit. If he does that, I've got legislation ready to build in California that says we will tax wealthy Californians who get that tax credit and then put that money back where it belongs, in our education systems. We need permanent revenue to solve the challenges that we have in our state around housing and addressing our homelessness crisis. We need to make sure that Californians can earn a decent living. We have the ability through technology to create jobs in computer science, in cybersecurity, where Californians can work in technology or in healthcare and earn a decent living. But we have to make sure that our young people graduate ready to enter into those professions. And I've launched a number of paid internship programs to help young people get into those jobs. And so we have to make sure that we stay focused on economic development, on housing, on healthcare. As a legislator, I voted to create universal healthcare for all people in our state because healthcare is a right. And I support a single-payer healthcare system, and I support reform of Prop 13 so that we have permanent revenue to meet the needs of our state around housing and around services for the people of California. I'm putting my 18 years of experience as elected official on the line to say that I want to serve the state that I love. I spent 20 years prior to being elected serving as a social worker and working with foster youth and people with disabilities and fighting for folks to be able to get out of poverty and have a chance to have a life and live in the American dream. And I want to create more of those opportunities for Californians as governor.
So I wanted to go to you mentioned housing as one of the key issues. I think we would all agree that's a key issue. So last year, the voters opposed Prop 33, which is the Justice for Renters Act. And I wasn't sure if you took a position on it, if you supported or opposed the ballot measure, but what was your position on that measure, and why do you think voters opposed it? And what do you, if as governor, what would you do to make sure that either Costa-Hawkins is repealed or rent control is expanded to more jurisdictions?
I support rent control, and you can go back to my time on the Richmond City Council to see the votes that I've taken. I think that whenever there's a statewide measure that could be helpful that is lost, sometimes there's voter confusion and corporate interests campaign heavily against it and they create confusion. And so a balanced rent control policy is something that can be supported by Californians, but Californians are going to want to know that if you own a few properties or you inherited a few properties, that you're not going to be punished for that. But there can be rent control, and that owners can even have some percentage of increase that they can make, a reasonable amount of increase to be able to maintain the properties, but that there shouldn't be the kind of gouging that we're seeing right now. And so I would support rent control in that way. But I think that the ballot system sometimes leads to confusion. And the other example that I would give is our effort to reform Proposition 13, a measure that hasn't been changed significantly since it was passed in the early 70s. And it's robbing our cities, our counties, our state, our schools of revenue that they need. And big corporations are allowed to pay the same amount of taxes that they paid since Prop 13 was passed. But the reform measure was voted on during the pandemic, and corporate interests campaigned and said that it was going to make every homeowner and every senior pay more money. And the truth of the matter is that wasn't true. Seniors aren't going to have to pay more. You can be a property owner. You can own a small business. You can be a farmer, and you weren't going to have to pay more. And so we just have to educate more and come up with balanced policies that will generate permanent revenue for our state. Right now, our state is looking at a $10 billion shortfall of revenue, which makes no sense when you think about where we were during the pandemic. You would think that we would have had a shortfall during the pandemic, but we had 2 years in the pandemic and coming out of the pandemic where we had record revenue because we rely on income tax revenue and other forms of revenue that fluctuate. And so that means, unfortunately, a lot of people made money off of us during the pandemic. And now we find ourselves in a revenue crisis. So we need to stabilize and balance that out with measures that allow us to have permanent revenue to address housing, to address social service needs, to address the needs of healthcare, and to address the homelessness that we see in our communities.
Okay, thanks. So you served as superintendent during a really turbulent time for California, obviously, and
I had hair before the pandemic started.
Right. So we had the COVID, we had the remote learning, absenteeism, all stemming from that initial crisis. How would you say that your crisis management skills are different from what we've seen from Governor Newsom? He's had his own crises of a different sort. How do you say it compares?
Well, during the pandemic, the first thing that I learned is that we have 1 million students in our state who did not have a computer or access to the internet. How can we, the technological leader of the world, with Silicon Valley and other places, have such a divide. And so when the pandemic started, I convened all the superintendents all across the state, the 1,000 school districts, and everyone agreed, without knowing what coronavirus really meant and what the impacts would be. We made the decision to temporarily make school remote. What we found out the next day is that 1 million students didn't have access to a computer. And so I hauled all the major internet service providers into a hearing and demanded that they provide free internet to California students. And they came up with a plan. First, they resisted. They ran. They wanted nothing to do with our select committee that dealt with closing the digital divide. And, the governor, myself, the first partner, and others, we're literally calling people and begging for donations for California students. And that's not the way that it should be. And so, but we were able to secure devices for our students so that they could be connected to school or be connected to a mental health provider. And what we've seen is that since the pandemic, our students have experienced learning gaps and depression. And so what I've done is work with the legislature. We've secured $6 billion to have more resources to close the digital divide so that we can have broadband all across the state. We've secured $8 billion for mental health resources for our students, $4 billion of those that can be provided in a school setting. Many of our students rely on the clinics at their schools to get health care, and we've strengthened the ability of our healthcare providers and our county health providers to work together in what I call the no wrong door strategy for our families to be able to get access to mental health. By the way, this is Mental Health Awareness Month, and I just want to remind anyone, whoever needs to talk to someone, we have a 24-hour system where you can talk to someone by texting or chatting 988. 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, you can be connected to a counselor. We have to remove the stigma around mental health. We have to make sure that we create opportunities for our loved ones to be supported, to get treatment, to be supported. And so during the pandemic, it was all crisis management all the time. And it wasn't until we discovered the rapid COVID tests, where you can know within 15 minutes if someone's positive or not, that I felt comfortable saying, okay, now it's time for us to come back to school. So I did 3 things. One, I wrote guidance for every one of our 10,000 schools on what to do when our students would come back to in-person. And the governor and I agreed on most things. We disagreed on a few things. My guidance said everyone had to wear a mask and we had to have social distancing. We followed the guidance of the CDC, and we said that we must do the same thing in our schools. I found out that there were 2 million rapid COVID tests sitting in a warehouse somewhere, and they were going to expire. And so I went to the governor. I said, let us have them for our schools so that our schools can reopen. He provided them. And then I made sure that we also distributed them to Native American tribes who saw disproportionate impacts in the pandemic, and to farm workers, those who were working every day to provide for us and who were experiencing risk. And then, while it was not in my job description, I worked to make sure we got the same type of resources for 600,000 grocery store workers. Because if you're like me, the only thing I did was go to the grocery store. Everything else was closed. And I got a call from the grocery store, from the union that represents grocery store workers, and said that they could not get PPE anywhere. And so I made a few calls, and we were able to get enough PPE to support 600,000 workers in our state to make sure that they could be safe to provide the groceries that we all depended on during the pandemic. And so it just seems to me that my experience has been born in crisis and managing crisis. Yeah. And, when we experience crisis and trauma, what I like to say is we're more than the sum of our circumstances. But the manner in which we come together dictates what we can do together. During the pandemic, more people got focused on just who can we blame. And, in my job, I get more than my fair share of blame. And I've always said this, I will take the blame that anybody wants to give as long as the people that we're working with are prepared to make solutions. And I'm very proud that during the pandemic, we secured those resources that I talked about, the rapid COVID tests, the $6 billion for broadband that we've essentially started to work to close the digital divide in this state, the $8 billion to address mental health services, billions to address learning, loss, and recovery. I'm proud that we are the only state, and I'm proud to have sponsored the legislation for this, that guarantees preschool for every 3- and 4-year-old in our state. And it's 100% free for every 4-year-old to go to transitional kindergarten. We did that during the pandemic, and I'm proud of the work that we've done to create that opportunity, because when you have access to early education, you're more likely to learn to read by 3rd grade. If you don't learn to read by 3rd grade, you're more likely to drop out. And if you're likely to drop out, you're likely to end up in the criminal justice system. And so just by simply making sure that we focus on early education and kids learning to read by 3rd grade, we can educate and not incarcerate people in the great state of California. And so I'm proud of the record during the pandemic. I'll be honest, it was the toughest moment that I've experienced in my professional life, watching people die from the impacts. And we had to get involved in healthcare and technology and mental health on top of the work they were doing to ensure that our kids were getting a quality education. We're seeing our schools bounce back from the pandemic. Most of our schools have reached a place where they are now beginning to perform at pre-pandemic levels, but we want to go beyond that. And so I'm working with 250 districts in our state to make sure that they have coaches in reading and coaches in math. They have extra time, a longer school day, extra tutoring, mentoring, and counseling. We secured some scholarships during the pandemic for anyone who wants to become a teacher or a mental health clinician, $20,000 per participant. If you know somebody who's interested in that, just have them call me, 1-800 where you're at, and we'll get them their money, because we need to have teachers and counselors who can support our students. These are the things that we've secured during the pandemic, and I'm proud of it. And but we'll continue to build on that to support Californians going forward.
Great. So every day there's a new horror show from the Trump administration. There's a split within the Democratic Party about the need to be more confrontational with the administration and its fascist movement. So the question is, how do you think about balancing the desire to fight with the need to fight for federal dollars? Because obviously, if you antagonize this guy too much, there's a backlash effect that comes. So how do you think about that fight?
You know, even if you don't fight, this president has demonstrated that he's willing to be as reckless and damaging to people as he possibly can. So I'm of the belief that we have to fight. We have to jam him every time, because we can't be silent when we see things happening. We see people being deported who are citizens and being accused of being in gangs. He's trying to challenge our entire court system. He's trying to get our court system to topple. He's disrupting the flow of our economy with his proposed tariffs and taking out his personal agendas on folks. You know, and so he's not going to refrain from attacks because we don't speak up. So I think it's in our best interest to speak up and stand up. And you're beginning to see Americans throughout the country speak up. The issue that I started with about the U.S. Department of Education, that is a great rallying, organizing place, because special education is a nonpartisan issue. Democrats and Republicans are affected by that alike. And we can organize there to get votes to block any effort to close the Department of Education, take away federal funding for the meals program or federal funding for special education. So I'm of the belief that we have to speak up, stand up, and fight back.
Great. Yeah, we got some applause for that. Okay, so in light of the wildfires that it affected our region here, basically there's a two-part question. One is, what's the plan for economic recovery in communities like Palisades and Altadena that really have been so deeply devastated? And then part two is, from a climate perspective, what do we do to make sure California is leading in the climate space and is preventing these types of devastating events from happening again?
When you think about what's been lost, it's going to take every level of government to help those who've lost a home, lost a business. It's going to take the state of California and the federal government. It's going to take the business sector and the charitable sector, philanthropy, and it's going to take the insurance companies the insurance companies have been let off the hook of meeting their obligation. Californians have been paying into plans that haven't been there for them when they were in their time of need. And as governor, I'm going to work to hold them more accountable. They need to feel pressure. They shouldn't just be able to take our money and then say, well, California will create its own homeowners insurance policy. The policy that California has created has gaps, and we need the sector to do its part and to hold them accountable to the people of California as they rebuild. During the wildfires, I spent a lot of time in LA and in Pasadena and Altadena bringing resources to help those, bringing food and water, with a particular emphasis on our school communities and helping our school communities get back into facilities, get back into the ability to educate our kids. We've raised private money. We've learned that disaster response is the new normal for California schools. At least since 2019, we've seen more wildfires, more flooding, and since that time, I've developed through a foundation that I partner with the ability to raise money so that we can help the families of school victims who are impacted by natural disaster, so that we can help to expedite the time that it takes for them to get help from the federal government, that they get help with the applications. And so we got to get better at our response times. We have to get better at our resource conservation so that we never find ourselves in a position where we don't have enough water to treat a fire. We have to strengthen our efforts around, there's some new resources coming to us right now. We have to make sure that we continue to educate about climate change, which is real. And one of the programs that I'm implementing right now is a program that engages 1 million of our students in the state in service learning and environmental education so that they understand that they are the true stewards of the environment. As a legislator, I helped to pass some of the toughest legislation that says idle oil wells had to be closed, and if you leak or spill a contaminant into water or into soil, that you'll pay the strictest fines, and that is law. And we have to continue to preserve our environment. I've taken votes to say that we need to divest from non-renewables. I've launched programs to focus on solar panel installation as a construction training industry so that we can continue to build on a green and renewable economy. And so we must continue to attack climate change at every level. Sea level rise, we have to address these issues because we're going to continue to see more challenges, and we have to support from every aspect of supporting our first responders to making sure that we have the resources, water, to fight these fires, to doing all that we can to address and prevent further natural disasters.
I appreciate it. Okay, so this one comes from one of our College Board of Trustees. He's asked that the California's master plan for higher education hasn't been updated since 1960. Does it still serve students, communities, and employers? And if not, what reforms would you pursue as governor?
I think we can do better. I think the biggest challenge with the master plan is a lack of funding. This year, the governor proposed that all of our CSUs would take, and our UCs, would take an 8% cut. And the state's the biggest investor in the UC and our CSUs, and they're struggling for revenue. And we need new revenue, not cuts to our programs. Some of our universities, like Sonoma State, have cut their entire athletics program, not just the sports teams, but those who teach those who want to work in any aspect of sports or related disciplines. And so our universities, including our community colleges, are starving for revenue. One of the programs that I passed when I was in the legislature is a guarantee that any foster youth will get full funding to go to any of our institutions in California. It's called the Chafee Grant. And it used to be that the money would run out. And we worked on a way to get a promise that in perpetuity, we can fund that type of higher education. This year, I introduced a bill called Pay It Forward that would make it free to go to a CSU or a UC, that students would be able to go for 4 years, and when they graduate and they get a job, that they start to pay back what they have received so that it creates a fund to replenish the fund for those who wish to come after them. That's where I think our master plan has to go, has to focus on how we do a better job of supporting our students. We have more homeless students in our community colleges, in our CSUs, in our USCs. We have students who are sleeping in their cars. We have faculty members who are sleeping in their cars. We have to do better so that we can make our system number one in research and job preparation and preparing Californians for the jobs of tomorrow. And so from my standpoint, the best thing we can do in the master plan is to generate more revenue. And I've launched a work group that is working on ways to come up with new permanent funding sources to help us get more money for our UCs, our CSUs, and our community colleges.
Thank you. Okay, so we have the World Cup and the Olympics coming to our region really soon in the next few years. And with that coming, there are some communities that are vulnerable that are at risk. One is the international guests, and with remarks made by J.D. Vance recently about that they could be deported if they overstay their welcome. But also we have the unhoused and low-income communities in LA that are at risk of being, displaced, swept under the rug, hidden away from public view. How do we protect those communities and prepare ourselves to be ready on the world stage for those events?
The Olympics created an incredible opportunity to promote economic development in the entire LA region. I'm sure for every dollar generated, you're probably looking at $6 more that can come back to the region, but we have to plan and strategize to make sure that that happens. And, obviously it's an exciting time from the standpoint of supporting our athletes, but we have to really think it through. There's an opportunity for our students to promote fitness and well-being. Students in this country have some of the highest rates of obesity, heart disease, and diabetes. And so this is an opportunity for us to promote fitness and to promote careers for our young folks and to create opportunities, jobs for those who work in our sectors, whether it be hospitality, our restaurants, our hotels, our industry, travel. We have to support all of the economies. And this is for some communities, this is a once in a lifetime opportunity. And we have to treat it like that and plan accordingly. This isn't an opportunity to just push homeless encampments further and further out. That's what I don't get about people's homeless encampment policies. Where do they expect people to go? If you just say you can't be here, but you don't create a housing policy that's going to provide supportive housing with the built-in wraparound supports to help someone who might need help with their mental health issues, with substance abuse, and the ability to land the job, then we're just kidding ourselves. If we allow that to happen, all we're doing is hiding a problem from the view of the cameras. This is an opportunity to get it right. The voters gave us $1 billion just a few years ago in a measure called Proposition 1 that allows us to build the kind of supportive housing and services that we need for veterans, for those who are struggling with mental health needs, and I would maximize the utilization of those dollars in Los Angeles and in other cities where we need to support those who are unhoused to get into programs that have built-in wraparound supports. Let me be clear. If the housing programs don't have mental health supports and substance abuse supports, we haven't gone far enough. We must address those, or we will continue to see individuals suffer being unhoused. And I'm committed to building these kinds of programs, not just for the Olympics, but for California in general.
Okay, great. Thank you so much. And now before we wrap up, we have one question from Dina Egglesrud, who wants to ask a question that we thought would be best to let you answer. And then Betty, if you don't mind answering so that she doesn't have to ask the same question twice in a row. You can come up if you want. It's kind of dark out there.
Okay. So I'm the legislative co-chair for the LA County Democratic Party, but I'm also the legislative and political advocate for Concept Art Association. My entire family works in the entertainment industry. Currently, the governor and the legislature are looking to expand the state's tax credits for the film incentives. And I know that right now, essentially only the amount for debate is up for debate with a few adjustments. If you were to become governor, those tax credits will be up for renewal. As they are currently formulated, there is no specific designation listed under qualified expenses for the generative AI systems that are being put into place. These were some of the things that were very contentious during the film industry strikes. And this being Los Angeles and the Los Angeles area, a lot of people here work in those jobs. As governor, would you be willing to instruct the California Film Commission to make sure that the generative AI systems receive their own designation and that those expenses would not be eligible to be listed as qualified expenses? Because if we're going to be giving tax dollars to the film companies to keep jobs in California, we want to make sure that those dollars are going to productions that are employing as many Californians as possible.
Short answer is yes.
Okay.
I've only supported tax credits for an industry that can show that it's going to create jobs for Californians. I voted for the last film tax credit. I'm sponsoring the current film tax credit. I've supported tax credit in in industries that create high-wage jobs like biotech and healthcare. The bottom line for me is that companies should only get the tax credit if they can show that they're producing jobs for Californians. And so I'm not interested in those who want to use AI to replace our workforce. I don't think a computer can replace the good work that a California worker can do. As a parallel, there is an AI roundtable talking about the role that AI can play in our schools. And I was asked to sponsor the legislation. And I said I will sponsor it under one condition, that the opening line in the legislation must say that AI will never replace a teacher, because nothing replaces what a good teacher at the head of every classroom can do. These can be tools that can support what teachers do and how we organize and manage data, but we should not allow AI to overtake any industry and just replace our workers. The Hollywood industry is an original. It is a California original. We can't afford to let it go away. Right now, we're losing to other states and other countries, and we have to get better. And the film tax credit is not enough. We have to make conditions and changes. We have to make sure that we have a workforce that is ready to step in. There are so many jobs, and they're not all in front of the camera. Many of them are behind the camera and in support roles. That's why I'm proud that right now, in our state, we were the only state providing $1 billion a year for arts and music education for California schools. So our kids can learn and become part of that workforce. And I'm working closely with unions like IATSE, who represent those who work in the film industry and who work in entertainment, to make sure that young people get opportunities to go into those jobs. And so I support the tax credit. I would actually expand it to make sure that we can make California competitive, so that we don't lose out to other states that are finding ways to get the work to come to them. This is a California original. We have to support it. And there is no computer that can do a better job than someone who's been doing the work in front of or behind the camera in our state.
Thank you.
Thanks, everyone. Ladies and gentlemen, Betty Yee.
Excuse me. I would like a moment. I'm not part of this group. I'm an independent. I didn't realize that we had to submit questions earlier because I don't get those emails, but this is an open forum. My name is Daniel Campbell, and I would like to ask a couple of questions.
No, you can ask one question.
Well, I'm sorry. You know what? You guys want to be Democrats, or you don't want to be Democrats? You want to be open, or do you not want to be open? Okay?
Democratic Party doesn't mean you get to ask a question.
So, number one.
Sir, I believe she was actually answering my question first.
As you go out and you tell people, lower your tone, man. I have to talk over the microphone. to your process of being governor or doing those. She asked her question, and you're just going to Betty E right now. So I want to ask something.
It's the same question, sir.
Number one, when you acknowledge voters, I think you should acknowledge not only Democrats but independents like I am. Number two, with the politicization of the courts in our land, in the nation, I always feel I am definitely a left-leaning independent, but I always feel like Democrats bring a knife to a gunfight, and I always feel like right now, I'll get into the question. Right now, I would say that this organization should focus on trying to influence the circuit court judges throughout the land, calling them up on their phone, leaving voicemails, calling the Supreme Court, leaving voicemails, and giving Democrats and independents some real everyday things that they could do once a day to influence not only what's happening in California, because we know California is a great state, okay? But it's a great state that can influence the rest of the nation. That's all I want to do.
Okay.
So,
You answer the question.
yeah,
Sure.
I want to address that in my other role.
What would you tell Democrats to do?
Sir, let me try to answer your question before I get to the question in the main for me. Sir, let me, excuse me, let me try to address the question. And I'll do this with the hat on that I have as until the end of the month as Vice Chair of the California Democratic Party. Sir, who asked the question?
I'm sorry, what?
I wanted to answer your question. There are many actions that people have been taking and many suggested actions that, frankly, everyone who's dissatisfied with the current administration are actually mobilizing every single day and every single weekend. And if you're having a problem accessing what those are, I think we can help you with that. There are lists of actions to take, including every day calling our elected officials, calling our judicial officials, and also just being in communities to educate people about the really basic issues that are at stake. But I wanted to, if you are not getting that information, that's on us. We will connect you with those actions that you can participate in. And but I also just want to acknowledge your point. Much of what's happening now is not about being a Democrat or being a Republican or being an independent. You know, our democracy as we know it, that actually is a place that respects all people here, is at stake. And so I hear your point on that, but just know that there are actions that are happening even as we speak because there is so much on the line. And so we will connect you with what those are. All the way to, and I don't know where you live, sir, but really your local Democratic clubs and parties really should be at the forefront of that because they've been mobilizing since January around all of this. So happy to take your name and let me see what I can do to connect you with what you can do to really join us in that work. Okay, thank you. Thank you for the question about the film tax credit. Thank you, Tony. Let's give it up for Tony Thurmond. I agree with the superintendent. Look, the entertainment industry is iconic to California. I support the film tax credit, but let me just be real about this as well. We are competing on a global stage with respect to this industry. And in some ways, I look at the credit as it's structured now as really buying us time to stave off the inevitable. And by the inevitable, I mean that we have to rethink this industry in terms of what it's going to look like in the future, and actually what it looks like now, in terms of how people are consuming entertainment, smaller platforms. I mean, there's just a lot of change coming to this industry. I actually have been looking at this industry as being very emblematic of what could happen to other sectors of our economy, where certainly the technological innovations could really take over. And so I think what has been why it's been so iconic in terms of a California industry is because we have this talent, we have the creativity, we have the innovation, and right now the innovation is kind of outpacing us. So what I've been very focused on is looking at how can we be sure that the great talent that we have here in California continues to be have all the tools that it needs to stay competitive. And so part of that can be with the tax credit, but it's actually, I think, a big initiative around workforce development that needs to take place. I've also been involved in discussions about the possibility of a federal credit that can lay on top of the state credit so that we actually have more tools to work with in terms of how we keep this industry here and keep people employed. And so I think all of these things are about all hands on deck. We have to figure this out. It is a huge part of our economy. It's a huge part of what attracts people to California. And so I, as your governor, will be looking at all these issues, but really I care more about the people who've been affected to be sure that they can still be in the space for the long term. And a lot of that has to do with probably what we need to be thinking about for other sectors of the economy. How do we continue to just be sure that the workforce is resilient, is trained, has the opportunity to access a lot of the tools? And I agree with you that when we talk about that film tax credit, AI is separate and apart from the human talent that we're trying to help.
All right, thank you.
Okay, thank you.
That's yours.
Oh, okay. Come on.
Okay. So thank you, Dina, for the excellent question. And thank you once more to Superintendent Thurmond on his way out for joining us this evening. And so we've already been graced by Betty Yee already, but just to give her a proper introduction, even though she's a longtime friend of this club, she served on the Board of Equalization for 8 years, then as state controller for 8 years, and she's also the vice chair of the California Democratic Party, and now she's running to be governor of California. So let's welcome Betty Yee.
Thank you very much, everyone. Thank you, John, and really appreciate the opportunity to address all of you and to our those who are joining online tonight. Look, I just want to say, as a native Californian, obviously very concerned about what is happening to our state, and also, along with all of you, what is happening to our nation. I spent actually, most of my career has been in public service because, growing up as a daughter of immigrant parents, you become an instant advocate. And you really begin to see where we have gaps in terms of how we serve our diverse communities. And, really from a very young age, advocating for my parents who had a small business in San Francisco who didn't speak English, it was really a passion of mine to be sure that they were getting connected to all the resources that they needed to be successful in their business. And that really translated into something that I became passionate about, and that is, how do we have our politics really be reflective of our diverse communities? And I grew up thinking that politics, and really believing still that politics is a good means to the ends that we want to see for our state. And which means that everyone has agency in our political system. Everyone has the opportunity to have a voice. And that when we talk about politics, yes, sometimes it can be the rough and tumble and the ugliness of what you read about in the newspaper. But at the end of the day, it's about how do we come together to really deliver with our public resources for the greatest public benefit. And being informed by that in terms of really inviting, those who are the most affected to really be at the table to tell us and to inform us about what some of the solutions can be. I'm a big believer in proximate leadership, that those closest to the problem probably are some of the best architects of the solution. And I do believe that government has failed on that front in terms of really hearing those voices around issues of homelessness, around issues of how we can get more people served in our diverse communities. All the gaps that we see that continue to be gaps that really shouldn't be because we just don't have the wherewithal as a government to understand how to best serve them. I also am a big believer that if you govern well, that this has a great potential for uplifting the health of our democracy. And governing to me, which has been my vocation for almost 4 decades, is about, how do we deliver results that are going to deliver the greatest public benefit. And when we don't govern well, and one of the things that has really struck me recently is just how governing has become this thing that's kind of popular. I'm sorry, but governing is what you elect people to do. It's not something separate and apart. And frankly, I get so offended when they're now governing consultants that want to come into government to do the job of government. So this is crazy. It's nuts. My thought about how you govern well is just very simple. And why it's so connected to having a good democracy is this. When you govern well, you're not afraid to really broaden civic and public participation. When you govern well, you're not afraid to invite strict accountability over the use of your public resources. When you govern well, you have the awesome responsibility of being sure that your resources are being used the most effectively and the most efficiently that they can be. When you govern well, you understand that the rule of law always includes that provision about how you take care of your most vulnerable communities. And when you govern well, you really begin to understand that accountability is what drives all of this. You know, I've been a controller, I've been on a tax board, but all of the resources that I've had to work with in terms of tax dollars, not my money. But we have to be very accountable about how we use it. And so one of the things that I would do differently in this next administration is that I would really invite strict accountability. We've had a lot of resources to work with, and as your controller, I can say we pushed a ton of money out the door. And I was very proud during the pandemic that my team was able to never be late on a payment. Everybody got a tax refund. All our 280,000 plus state workers got paid on time. You know, we paid our vendors on time. We didn't have to do any external borrowing to pay the bills for California because we managed the cash well. I mean, all of that we did well. And people really, the best compliment we got during the pandemic was, wow, that controller's office, they're our fiscal first responder. And we took pride in that. But all to say that when we're accountable, we know then that if things aren't working, when we actually take a look and see what those dollars are doing, are they actually getting us the outcomes that we want? If they're not, we pull that back and we get around the table and figure it out. Because we are here to solve problems. And it is the greatest honor of my life to have spent almost 40 years doing that. And I'll just end with this before we get to questions. You know, when you are actually seeing in our communities what is happening in terms of the direction of this country, you know, people often ask, you know, and this gentleman here asks, you know, we should be doing something. We should be calling our Ninth Circuit justices. We should be doing all of that because none of what is happening today should be normalized by any means. And so we have to fight back every single day. Find the one or two things that you can do because it does make a difference. But the other thing we have to do is really focus on how do we get back to delivering for the people of California. My husband and I spent the last election cycle in the Central Valley, and I will tell you from door knock to door knock, and we knocked on hundreds of doors. The biggest complaint was just not getting served on the most basic of needs. And that's on us. That's on us. I take that seriously, having been in the space for as long as I have. And so what do we do about that? We make sure that we go back and we are really following the tenets of good governance, that we are really engaging our public and uplifting civic participation so that we can be informed about how we govern, and that we actually do take accountability seriously. So this is going to be the hallmark of my administration. Yes, I'm a fiscal wonk, but at the same time, you know, nothing is going to be more important than gaining the public's trust and confidence back than really being an accountable government. So I look forward to being your next governor. It is something that I have always valued because in order to have a state that has been as progressive as we are, we have to be accountable for how we deliver the results to make sure that everyone is a part of this economy here in California and that our communities are thriving. And we can only do that if we are just turning our attention to things that are local, the things that we can actually affect every day while we're fighting and resisting at the higher levels. So I'm just glad to be here, John, and look forward to answering your questions.
Well, thanks. So you started talking about, accountability as a major difference from the current administration, and you also served under the previous governor, Jerry Brown.
Yes.
So just in general, your leadership style and what kind of governor would you be? What would we see as different from what we're looking at?
Yeah, so I'm a very stakeholder-driven leader. I don't pretend to have all the answers. I have some ideas, and I think some of them are pretty well informed. But as a stakeholder-driven leader, I want interests to come to the table. This is not about, we get to an outcome of where we're trading this particular issue for this issue. We need sustained solutions for the issues we're facing. And when we are stakeholder driven, I'll give you an example. We talk about housing, and yes, that will be also on the top of my list. Frankly, the affordability agenda around housing costs, healthcare costs, and electricity costs are going to be my top three. And all within the rubric of what has been happening to our state with respect to the ravages of climate change already, and all of you know what that feels like here in Southern California. But in terms of being a stakeholder-driven leader, we make a lot of assumptions in Sacramento. I was a former budget director for Governor Davis, and what used to always make me feel very uncomfortable was not knowing what a dollar going out to school transportation looked like for LA County, LAUSD versus somewhere up in Shasta County. We don't know those things, but it would be great to be in the know about that. And it also would be great to build that trust to where we can have these dollars be flexible so that they actually can be deployed to help our learners throughout the state. So there will be a very external-facing aspect of how we are going to govern. And there also will be a different relationship with the legislature where there will be early engagement on bills and also an expectation that we want these budget hearings that happen in the legislature to be about how our dollars are being used, and if they're not getting the outcomes that we have set out to have these dollars deliver, then we pull back and we not keep funding the same things that continue to build dysfunction. And frankly, the real underlying problems not being addressed until they reach a crisis proportion, and we're solving the crisis, but not the underlying foundation of what needs to be fixed.
Okay, so Governor Newsom has notoriously vetoed a significant number of progressive bills. Do you agree with that approach? Would you be more inclined to sign bills that just by virtue of the fact that they came through the legislative process? Or do you think that, there's some role the governor needs to play in vetoing?
I worked for a governor who actually engaged the legislature during the legislative process. So I would hope that what I would receive as legislation would be a pretty well negotiated, agreed upon proposal, certainly on the large issues. There will be bills, obviously, that don't go through that type of deliberation that will come to me. I'm not a big believer of putting labels on things because, frankly, what's progressive for one party may not be for the other. What is going to drive me in terms of what I do in this administration is our economy. We're the fourth largest economy in the world, and when you peel that back, it's not working well for a lot of people. And so I hope we can make some headway on the affordability issues. I hope we can make some true headway on particularly housing. And but this is where I think what's been missing. When I termed out as controller in January 2023, I traveled the state extensively because I couldn't do it during the pandemic. And what I heard, meeting with different leaders around the state, didn't matter if you were Democrat, Republican, Independent, didn't matter what income level you were, didn't matter your age. But the one issue that was so palpable that was articulated by almost everyone with whom I met was that we're not sure that we can be here in California for the long term. And these are from lifelong Californians like myself and from people who were newer residents of California. And that just blew me away because I thought, my gosh, what could this state become? We could lose an abundance of talent. We could have industries not look to California because we lose that talent. And so it made me begin to really think about, where have we gone awry? And I think where we've gone awry is this. We solved the particular issues, but we're not dealing with systems. And I know this sounds really wonky, but it doesn't necessarily mean it. I'll give you an example. When we talk about the housing crisis, yes, we have to build to the demand, but housing to what end? And I'd like to think that we can be a little bit broader about our focus and think about how do we build economically and environmentally sustainable communities. Because inherent in that is about what are the jobs that we're trying to attract, what are the sectors that we're trying to attract, who's responsible for all of that happening. And it also increases engagement, which I think is really, really key in terms of people not having the feeling that we're doing things to them as a government, but that they actually have a say about what they want the vision in their lives to look like. And so when I think about housing to what end, the state should take a larger role, and frankly, the primary role in driving business development incentives. That we are attracting the businesses and industries that are going to actually provide the jobs of the future, good paying jobs in the future, so that those who are actually trying to attain economic mobility don't have to leave to find it. We should be uplifting our anchor institutions like our education, our schools, our community colleges, our universities, and frankly, our healthcare systems to really be more amenable to who's actually in these communities. There are going to be communities in the Central Valley that probably will never see a full-scale hospital because they can't afford it. And I'm not so sure that they need it. If we lift up our primary care clinic system, if we have a standalone emergency room system, I mean, there are ways to kind of put this together that actually can work, can serve people, can be more efficient. But our mindset has always been set on building large-scale projects that never get built on time, that always cost more, and at the end of the day don't really meet the needs of people. So we can do better. We have the wherewithal, we have the talent, we have the technology, and that's what's going to be different going forward.
So I want to get your big picture thoughts on everything that's going on in the federal level from the Trump administration. And in your role as governor, the real question is, how do we protect our vulnerable communities in California? You know, Ted Lieu was here last month. We asked him about what he's doing to fight them.
Yes.
As governor, I'm really concerned about our communities here. So how are we going to protect all those communities?
Yeah, so first of all, we can't talk about our communities as being part of an either-or conversation. Look, this president is hell-bent on having this nation look a certain way. And frankly, it doesn't include a lot of people who look like many of us in this room. And so California has got to be protecting all of our diverse communities. And we will do that, whether it's that we declare ourselves a sanctuary state. And part of why this conversation really frustrates me to some degree is that there are many out there, including Democrats, frankly, who believe that we've gone too far in terms of our embrace of our diversity. And I will say that is the role of government, is to be sure that we're ensuring access, that we're ensuring equity, that we are not leaving communities behind. And for me, this debate that's taking place right now about Medi-Cal coverage for the undocumented community members of ours is one that I hope really does not succeed in terms of cuts in Medi-Cal to those community members. When all we need is a public health emergency to understand that these are our neighbors. These are the people who help our economy thrive. These are our workers in so many of our economic sectors. And yet, if we're not going to cover them with respect to health care, we all are going to be vulnerable. And so I hope that the conversation, I know the legislature will be putting up a big fight on that. I intend to embrace that in terms of understanding that this is a population that pays taxes. They are here. They are helping our economy, and we should, in kind, be able to provide them with basic health care.
Okay, so I want to ask you about the sort of how you combine your dual experience as a party leader and as a public official through this specific lens that I asked Superintendent Thurmond about. There's this split within the Democratic Party about how much do we confront the administration? How much fight do we want to show? This whole thing with Chuck Schumer and the budget, and whether we have to wait until the right moment. So as a party activist, I know you've seen that side of it, but then also as governor, there's practical implications here too. So how do you balance these two instincts?
Yeah, so I would call it less of a balance and more of a necessity to pay attention to both. So obviously, what is happening at the national level, as I said earlier, we cannot have that be kind of normalized. So we do push back at every turn, and I am happy that we have our Democratic attorney generals across the nation really leading that charge through the judicial system. But I think California needs to stand up because we are the bellwether in terms of what an inclusive and diverse society and economy can look like. So we will definitely be fighting back at every turn with respect to the Trump administration policies. However, at the same time, we ought not lose sight about how we uplift our communities here. And this is why I think it's really a detriment when we talk about, it's not an either or, it's a both and. And frankly, all we can affect is what's here in our communities. And so I hope that we can actually strengthen our communities in ways that help us really counter a lot of what is happening with the Trump administration. I want to see us really lean in on how we grow our economy so that we're less reliant on federal funds going forward. Look, we've had federal funding cuts in the past before, but nothing of this magnitude, and we're not going to be able to borrow our way out of this. But we can because we are a powerhouse global economy. If we are truly about shared economic prosperity, if we're truly about touching every region of the state with economic opportunities, there is no reason why we can't build an economy that actually is responsive to the climate crisis, that looks at how we keep jobs here in California, that looks at how we generate revenue here in California that the federal government can't take away. So we have to lean in on that. This doesn't happen serially, it happens simultaneously. And so that is something I'm going to be very, very vocal about and really engaging Californians on. I will tell you, after having traveled the state pretty extensively for a long time, we live in a great state. You all know this. It is a difficult state for many people to live in because of the high costs. But when you think about what it is that we have to offer to different parts of the state as a region, and how we are just really accessible in terms of everything that we produce being benefited by everyone around the world, there's no problem that arises in California that I don't believe couldn't be solved right here in California because we are that talented. And I believe that to my core. But we have not done a good job of connecting up that talent with where the challenges are. And that is what I hope to be able to do when we turn our governance into more of an external-facing operation, and also look to really being sure that we are welcoming a lot of perspectives that can help us, get here. It's ambitious, and it is actually ripe, because it is about how we build our own future resilience, both fiscally and also, I hope, in a sustainable way as well.
Thanks. So wanted to ask you a couple of questions about the wildfires in our region. And the first one is about economic recovery. Communities that have been completely devastated, like Pacific Palisades, Malibu, Altadena, what's the plan to make sure that we have the resources to bring those communities back, especially with the gamesmanship that we're seeing at the national level? Yeah, so I think the state has a significant role to play in this, and what I talked about in terms of how we build economically, environmentally sustainable communities, this could actually be the model for how we do it. What is the state going to do? And let me just preface this by saying there are certain aspects of governance that I think are really important, and that is particularly around defining roles and responsibilities among different levels of government. The public deserves the right to know who's responsible for what. After all, it is their tax dollars. But they deserve to know because what people are experiencing is a lot of finger pointing and not actually seeing the accountability that they had hoped for. And I think as we think about rebuilding here, we have to be very clear about how we're doing it, who's making the decisions, and really setting timelines that are realistic so that people really understand that this is going to be successful, and how do we hold ourselves accountable for that. And so I hope that we can actually talk about roles and responsibilities so that as dollars are becoming available, whether through FEMA, whether through the state, that we're not just tripping over each other in terms of how to utilize those dollars, but that they're really going into the community because of robust community input, because we know who's responsible for doing what. And then I also believe that we have to be very transparent about how we're rebuilding. A lot of concern about, are we rebuilding to burn again, or are we rebuilding for the long term? And this is going to require, I hope, at the outset, a lot of different parties to be at the table to talk about how we build back smarter. And there are a lot of tools that we have to work with, but frankly, I think our first responders should be at the table. We should have definitely our planners at the table. We had a wildfire situation up in Sonoma County a few years ago. They were able to rebuild in one subdivision within 3 years because the residents just got together, and the local elected officials realized that what they were complaining the most about was how long the permitting process took. And so what they decided to do, the local elected leaders, was to essentially have the planning department work with designers to come up with, I believe it was like half a dozen models of how homes could be rebuilt, so that homeowners could just pick a model
And that went through the permitting process fairly quickly. I'm not suggesting that works for the Palisades or for Altadena, but there are ways to accelerate this. And then I would say, let's look at technology and innovation to come in to help expedite the permitting process. It takes too darn long, and there are ways that we can do this without, obviously infringing upon any kind of privacy issues. But this is the time where we actually need to capitalize on all of those assets that we can put our hands on.
Okay, thanks. And then the other part, obviously, is the climate element. There's not even that much denial now that these were caused by the climate acceleration. So California's always been a leader on this. What do we do to continue to lead there and prevent future disasters?
Yeah, so, one of the things that I have witnessed probably for the last 15 years now is that as a government, we don't do a very good job of building capacity to meet the vulnerabilities that we're going to face. And by that, I mean, we know about the climate crisis. We know that the economy also itself will be undergoing a lot of change because of innovation and technology. And so how do we prepare for that before it actually hits? And one of the things that I've been thinking a lot for a lot of years now, and I was actually appointed by Governor Newsom to his Future of Work Commission several years ago before the pandemic. And when the pandemic hit, lo and behold, the future of work was right in front of us in terms of remote work and different ways of working. But I raise this because we do know what the vulnerabilities are going to be. And I remember a time in California where we actually were better prepared in terms of how to help people who were going to be facing economic challenges and economic vulnerability. And it could have been, just much more of an ease to get back and to get into a job training program. It could be temporary cash assistance. It could be other kinds of work supports. But, all of those things are actually not in good shape. We don't have a child care system that is really worth anything because we have not talked about child care as being really kind of a work requisite issue. It's been a work-adjacent issue that most people have talked about, but it is the primary support for how we can really build this workforce for the future. We've not talked about, I've always thought the unemployment insurance program, for example, could be a worker resilience fund so that as our economy changes and as technology and innovation takes hold in different sectors, that workers aren't losing ground, but that they're actually being paid to learn and continue to transition into the new jobs of today and tomorrow. So all of these things we actually have ability to build and to have in place and to be flexible enough to change with our economic conditions, but we've not committed ourselves to doing that for a very, very long time. So that is something that I do want to bring back. With respect to climate, I look at this as an economic issue as well. There are lots of actually economic opportunities related to climate, and particularly in the climate technology space. And I know that investors always kind of, rub their hands and kind of shake their heads like it's really risky. How do we invest in this? We invest in it by actually deploying it in communities that actually know how it's going to make a difference in their own resilience. And there are many of them here in California, and they tend to be the frontline communities that bear the brunt of a lot of the environmental degradation that we see here in California today. So I would say that there's a lot to work with. We have, and my whole orientation being in the finance arena is that our resources are finite. And that's not to say we don't go and ask voters to approve new taxes, but right now, I don't think you're going to have an appetite for that. So what do we do with the resources that we have? How can we be smarter about how we deploy those resources? And a big part of our economy also that's been devastated is our small business community. And how do we bring that back from the perspective of looking at how we can have regulatory navigators help our small businesses so that they're not having to just spend so much out of their pocket to navigate their requirements? How do we look at being sure that we're giving them assistance every step of the way in terms of their interface with state agencies and local departments, because everything just takes so darn long. All of these things we can do. We have the wherewithal, and we just have to bring that focus to bear. But we're going to resolve the climate crisis when people feel like we're doing it from an economic perspective, when they feel like their economic condition is improved by how we tackle the climate crisis. And I sit on a national sustainability organization board called Ceres, and I will say that the biggest impediment to transitioning to a clean energy economy is good paying jobs. the promise of good paying jobs, the promise of the ability that people are not going to lose their livelihood because we're going into a renewable economy that may have fewer jobs or that may have lesser paying jobs. Maybe they're not union jobs, but this is what we have to tackle because California will continue to lead in this space. We also have to continue to lead in just showing the rest of the world that we care about the talent that we have here and that we're going to value them and do that in a way where we're keeping them here and they're very, very much a part of how we're going to conquer the climate crisis.
Thank you. So HUD estimates over 1.5 million low-income renter households in California pay more than 50% of their income on rent and utilities. This burden drives homelessness and also increased death rates. Will you commit to substantially increasing the state funding for rental assistance? And what's your experience been in demonstrating that we can count on you to do it?
Yeah. So first of all, let me just say that I think we need all the tools in the tool belt. The way that I like to solve problems is frankly having a menu of options because it creates that flexibility about how we deal with different conditions around the state. I definitely will look at rental assistance. It has to be, we tend to look at the side of the ledger in terms of why the numbers of our homeless population keep growing and not the other side of the ledger with respect to how many are actually housing insecure or vulnerable of becoming unhoused. And we have to really pay attention to that side because to me, we're spending much more money once people get into homelessness and not with any guarantee that they're going to get the services they need to come out of it. But when they're just on the brink and really are feeling that vulnerability is where we need to catch them. And that's the commitment we have to make to them. And whether it's through our community organizations, whether it's so my experience in this has really been working with many community-based organizations that do really basic work with the homeless population. Everything from really trying to identify where their family members are and contacting them, all the way to looking at pairing them up with the services they need. And there's been some great models I've visited here in California, and there have been models that have been part of a spectrum of services. I think we need better coordination around these services. Again, we need to know which level of government is doing what. And there has to be an expectation about, when we provide rental assistance, that we are building that housing for them. This is not in a place of, but that we are going to continue to accelerate the building of rental housing, multifamily housing here in California. So it's got to be the entire package. I actually was supportive of the ballot measure just to get that one more tool in the tool belt, right? And so it's got to be a menu of options because every region is different. But when we have that, we have the flexibility to really fashion the kinds of programs that different communities need.
So that was obviously going to be my next question, but with regard to Prop 33. So you were on the record supporting it.
Yes.
And I think you were the only candidate in the field, or maybe one of two that supported it.
I was the only one.
You were the only one. Okay. So why did you support it? Or you said you wanted to have the tool in the toolbox.
Yeah.
Why do you think it failed? What is going on? And what do we do now? Do we go back to the ballot again? Are there other methods? How do we repeal Costa-Hawkins, or how do we expand rent control?
I think I definitely want to look at expanding rent control. I think Costa-Hawkins has had a lot of misperceptions associated with it, to where I'm not sure that's a good starting point, but we can still have the impact with respect to looking at rent control. But I also think that the public deserves to have a comprehensive look at how we deal with housing for renters within the entire rubric of how we deal with housing for all Californians. This is an issue where obviously it's an economic issue. We can only attract the talent here in California if people feel like they can afford to live here. And employers, that is their number one issue now. It's not taxes, it's where are our workers going to live? And many of our employers in California have approached me, not the big Silicon Valley titans, but really employers who've decided to put their stake in the ground to say, look, we want to recruit the best talent in California. We are putting up our own housing assistance programs. Would the state consider actually incentivizing more companies to do that? Obviously, I'm not a big fan of companies being able to kind of cherry pick people, but at the same time, I think there's something there with respect to more that the state can do. So I definitely will be looking at rent control as a way that can just bring some equilibrium to this. And more importantly, there's just the idea that people are paying 50% or more of their income, towards rent is unconscionable, and with the other high costs. So we're going to be very focused on bringing costs down in every one of these pillars that I talked about: housing, healthcare, and electricity.
And what are your big picture views on increasing housing production? I mean, there's, the housing wars in California, and Senator Wiener has proposed SB 79, and there's a lot of back and forth. In Santa Monica, it was hotly debated at
Right.
City Council recently. So do you think that's the right approach? Are you worried about, gentrification and displacement of renters?
I'm very worried about it, which is why I do believe this should be really turned outward to be a community-oriented focus with certain criteria about what different, and this gets back to where if it's just solely focused on housing, these are the debates we're going to have. If it's focused on housing that actually helps us develop economically and environmentally sustainable communities, it's a different discussion. Because you're broadening the focus. You're broadening the focus to me to look at opportunities, other economic opportunities. And really, at the end of the day, that is kind of the purpose of housing. And so I hope that with that, and why I feel confident about that, and then how can the state actually have the right incentives for that to happen? I'd like to have, I'm not a big hammer person, but I certainly know how to use a hammer. But I do think that having carrots really makes sense, particularly if we're talking about just trying to bring communities together so that they can have the ability to develop a common vision for what they want their communities to look like. And why I came to that conclusion. I was also a no on Prop 36. And the reason being was that I really thought that the debate, the legislative debate, and the public debate around Prop 36 was a false one because it's an economic issue. It's bottom line an economic issue. And if we're actually talking about how we're building economically sustainable communities, then public safety becomes something that should be less contentious. We all want safe communities, but we want safe communities where we know that every one of our community members has the opportunity to thrive. And so these are the conversations that we have, and again, in my own mindset, resources are finite. How can we be smarter about using our resources to build up community, which frankly is going to be the foundation of what we're going to need to keep fighting off all of these policies coming from Washington, and that the strength of what we have here on the ground in California is what makes us unique. And it's going to what's going to keep our diversity. It's going to be what keeps us diverse economically and also as a state with our community. So I just feel very strongly about this. And I do believe that when we turn these conversations outward and get people's best thinking, when they're actually having to face their neighbors about how they really think about this and not be the end voice about vetoing any project, that those conversations can be different, especially if we have the right incentives from the state level.
So what have you done to advance or help to support single-payer healthcare in California? We've seen these bills come up through the legislature. They've never gone across the finish line.
Yeah.
As governor, what's your plan to see it through?
Well, I think I served on the CalPERS board. We negotiated healthcare rates with health plans for our public sector, for our state employees. The biggest impediment to moving to a single-payer healthcare system is people losing what they currently have. I know that sounds crazy. People have expensive health care, but they're afraid to lose it because they have it to something that they don't know what it looks like. And so I think the steps that the state has taken so far are right. Tell us what the medical services plan should look like under this system. We're going to need the federal waivers in terms of the flexibility to spend our federal dollars to support this so that we can get to a unified finance system for healthcare. And so those steps have to be taken. Obviously, we're kind of we're going to be sidetracked a little bit with this Trump administration, but we should be refining everything about healthcare in California now to get to a successful single-payer healthcare. And the things that I've been focused on is how can we do better with respect to ensuring access, and how can we do better with respect to ensuring equity in our system? Because if we're just replacing the current system with a single-payer system and not addressing that, I'm not so sure that what consumers are going to be getting is going to be any better. And so, and particularly in my own community, in the API community, we still have a lot of gaps and disparities. And so, and I think for all communities, we ought to be paying attention to that. There's been some progress with the Affordable Care Act, but there's more work to do. And particularly given our geographic differences here in California, we want to be sure that we're not leaving any community behind.
Okay, thanks. So a parent asked just simply the question, what about the children? So converting that into a more fuller question, what are your specific plans to improve outcomes for K through 12 students, especially low-income communities?
Yeah. So I really want to return our public schools to be our community hubs. And there's been, and we did just approve a $10 billion school bond, and so I hope that we can improve the quality of our facilities to where these are, safe places for learning, but also safe places for where we can have communities come together. And but the biggest issue that I want to tackle, really, as governor, is how do we begin to build and sustain and promote a care sector that really is about having quality childcare, where that should not be the worry that families have in terms of being able to find it, to be able to afford it, and know that their children are going to be starting their development with quality childcare. And so that's foundational to me. There are many, many aspects of our state that really depend on just full participation and more workforce development in terms of the needs of our jobs going in the future. Without that aspect taken care of and really addressed in a robust way and funded, I'm not so sure that we're going to be able to remain competitive economically. So, and I know it's about children, but it's also about what we do in terms of that investment in them at the early stage. And I also would peel back and look at, from an accountability standpoint, what has actually happened with a lot of our early childhood monies. There are a lot of different pockets that we spend on children, and yet at the same time, I'm not so sure that we have a good picture about what we're getting for it. Not to say that we're not getting anything positive for it, but there's just too much out there, whether it's First Five, whether it's our after-school programs, whether it's looking at the arts programs, arts education programs that we have now. But we really do need to have better accountability about what we currently have in place, what needs to be uplifted that's successful, and then also where the gaps continue to be.
Okay, great. So I want to ask you one more question, which is regarding the upcoming World Cup and Olympics. And Superintendent Thurmond said it's a great economic opportunity for us. But as I pointed out in my question, there's also concerns with the federal government that some people may not feel safe to come. And also, just as happens with these big events, some communities get swept under the rug for optics.
Right.
How do we keep those communities safe to make sure that these events are good for everybody?
I actually think the Olympics, this administration in Washington will be trying to insert themselves in it. It's a great venue for them to actually look at carrying out their policies, whether it's immigration related or otherwise. A couple things. One, I think we have to build this support for the Olympics being hosted here on a global level. And you see what's happening in terms of other countries pushing back against our own with respect to our government. And let's not conflate that people around the world don't like our government, that they still like us. And so I think there is a way to build goodwill around the world to be sure that we are ensuring the safety of everyone who's involved with the Olympics. Secondly, I think one of the things that we often do when we have big events like this come to California is that we have all these amenities that come into place for the event, but what's left after the event leaves. And for me, I hope that the safety that we can provide for everyone involved in the Olympics, particularly our athletes, is the same kind of safety that we can have in place after the Olympics leave. And with that, I would say that there's a lot that we can invest in terms of just issues around mobility, for example, of how we're going to get people to move around during the Olympics, that I hope are systems of transportation that can stay after the Olympics leave, particularly in some of our lesser served areas in South Los Angeles. So I hope we're thinking about that in a strategic way, because it's going to cost a lot, and I hope that the investments that we make to have a successful Olympics will have long-lasting impact for the communities that will remain here, and hopefully seeing some benefit as a result of the Olympics.
All right, well, thanks so much. Let's give another round of applause to
Thank you.
Betty Yee.
Thanks, Don.
So, folks, before we close tonight, I want to take a moment to honor someone who's very dear to this club and to so many across California. Jennifer Barraza Mendoza, a longtime member of the Santa Monica Democratic Club, passed away on Tuesday morning after a long and courageous battle with cancer. She was just 37 years old. I first met Jen when we ran together as delegates on the progressive slate, and not long after that, she became part of our club's inner circle. Jen brought a rare mix of sharp political strategy and personal warmth that you don't really see too often. Her career was remarkable: organizing director for SEIU Local 99, deputy director for the State Senate Democratic Caucus, a principal at Hilltop Public Solutions, and part of the national campaigns team at the National Education Association. Many of us in the club got to know her best during her time working for then State Senate President Pro Tem Kevin DeLeon. In 2018, when this club proudly supported his run for the U.S. Senate, Jennifer was everywhere, in the room with us, out in the field, showing up with grace and grit. We may not have elected Kevin to the Senate, and maybe the less said about that, the better, but their campaign's efforts helped us flip House seats and take back control of Congress. Jennifer was the kind of person who led with purpose and compassion, who stood firm in fights that mattered, and helped build coalitions that could win. She's survived by her husband, Eddie Mendoza, and by a wide community of people across the state who loved her, respected her, and learned from her. Many of our local elected officials missed tonight's meeting because they're attending her wake. I'll be joining them at her funeral tomorrow at 11 a.m. at Hollywood Forever Cemetery. Jennifer was one of us. She may not have lived in Santa Monica, but she was a Santa Monica Democrat in every sense. We loved her, we missed her, and we carry her conviction forward in every campaign, every protest, every fight for justice. We adjourn in her memory. Thank you.